The sound of my sister's laughter still echoes in my mind. Sharp, cutting, merciless. She pointed at my uniform like it was a costume from a discount store, her perfectly manicured finger trembling with amusement. "Really, Sarah? You're going to wear that to our father's funeral?" Her voice dripped with the same condescension she'd perfected since childhood. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in exactly 47 minutes, 100 of America's most elite soldiers would snap to attention at my single word, and my sister's laughter would die in her throat forever. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of the day my family discovered who I really was. The day their mockery turned to stunned silence, and their shame became my vindication. It started 3 days earlier, when the call came. Dad was gone. Heart attack at 62, sudden and merciless. I was in a classified briefing room in Langley when my phone buzzed with Jessica's number. My sister's voice was already thick with tears and what I recognized as her practiced grief, the kind she'd perfected for maximum sympathy at social gatherings. "Sarah, he's gone. The funeral is Saturday. Can you come home?" Home. The word felt foreign on my tongue. I hadn't been back to Millbrook, Connecticut in 4 years. Not since the last family gathering where Jessica had introduced me to her country club friends as my sister who plays soldier. "I'll be there," I said simply. "Good. And Sarah, try to dress appropriately. You know how Mother gets about appearances." I knew exactly how Mother got about appearances. I'd been hearing about it for 15 years, ever since I'd chosen the Air Force Academy over Yale Law School. The disappointment in her voice when I told her I was commissioned as a second lieutenant still haunted quiet moments. The way she'd introduced me at functions. "This is Sarah, she's in the military." As if it were a phase. As if it were something temporary and slightly embarrassing. But standing in my Pentagon office 48 hours later, staring at my dress blue uniform hanging perfectly pressed on the door, I felt the familiar weight of duty settle on my shoulders. This uniform wasn't a costume or a phase. It was who I'd become, who I'd earned the right to be. The reflection staring back at me from my apartment mirror that Friday night told a story my family had never bothered to read. 20 years of service, 15 years of classified missions they'd never hear about, awards they'd never see, sacrifices they'd never understand. The silver star hidden in my jewelry box wasn't for playing soldier. The Purple Heart wasn't for show. And the 3 stars on my shoulders, those weren't participation trophies. Saturday morning came gray and cold, with that particular Connecticut drizzle that seeps into your bones. I stood outside St. Mary's Episcopal Church, watching black sedans and luxury SUVs deposit my family's social circle onto the wet pavement. Millbrook's elite, dressed in their armor of designer grief. My rental car, a modest sedan that screamed government budget, looked pitiful among the BMWs and Mercedes. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, my hands gripping the wheel, steeling myself for what was coming. The first person I saw was my cousin Mark, Jessica's husband, adjusting his Armani tie as he helped their teenage children from their Tesla. His eyes found me across the parking lot, and I watched his expression shift from recognition to poorly concealed disdain. He whispered something to his son, my nephew Kyle, who glanced in my direction and smirked. That smirk. God, it looked exactly like Jessica's. "Aunt Sarah's here," I heard him say to his sister Emma as I approached. In her little soldier costume. Emma giggled, a sound like broken glass. "Mom said she'd probably wear it. She always has to make everything about her." I felt the familiar burn of shame in my chest, but I pushed it down. I'd learned to compartmentalize feelings a long time ago. It was a survival skill in my line of work. The church steps were crowded with mourners, and I had to weave through clusters of conversations that died abruptly when people noticed my uniform. The whispers started immediately. "Is that appropriate for a funeral? Sarah always was different." Or Ellen, having to explain this. My mother appeared at the church entrance like a perfectly coordinated grief counselor in her black Chanel suit. Her eyes found mine, and I watched her face cycle through emotions. Sorrow, frustration, resignation. She descended the steps with practiced grace, her arms extending for an embrace that felt like a performance. "Sarah, darling, you made it." Her voice carried the carefully modulated tone she used at charity luncheons. Then, quieter, with an edge, "You wore the uniform." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "It's my dress uniform, Mother." It seemed appropriate to honor Dad. "Honey, you know how people talk, and today isn't about statements." Before I could respond, Jessica emerged from the church like a widow from central casting. Her black dress was museum-quality expensive, her makeup applied by someone who clearly charged by the hour. When she saw me, her step faltered for just a moment before that familiar smile spread across her lips. The smile that had tormented me through childhood. The smile that said she knew something I didn't. "Sarah!" She rushed toward me with arms outstretched, but her eyes were already scanning my uniform with obvious amusement. "You actually wore it. I thought Mom was exaggerating." The embrace was brief and cold. When she pulled back, her hands remained on my shoulders and her voice dropped to what she probably thought was a whisper but was clearly meant to carry. "Really, Sarah? You're going to wear that to our father's funeral? I mean, I know you like attention, but this is Daddy's day." The laughter started small, like a giggle caught in her throat. Then it grew. Other family members began to notice, their conversations pausing as they turned to watch Jessica's performance. My cousin Mark joined his wife, his smirk widening as he looked me up and down. "Jesus, Sarah, it's a funeral, not a Veterans Day parade." More laughter. Uncomfortable chuckles from family friends who didn't want to seem rude, but couldn't resist joining the spectacle. I felt the familiar heat of humiliation creeping up my neck, the same feeling I'd carried since childhood when Jessica would hold court at family dinners, turning me into the punchline of jokes I never understood until it was too late. "I wore it to honor Dad," I said quietly, but my voice was lost in the growing murmur of disapproval. "Honor Dad?" Jessica's voice pitched higher, drawing more attention. "Dad would be mortified. You know how he felt about all this." She gestured vaguely at my uniform. "He wanted you to be successful, not playing dress-up with the boys." The words hit like physical blows. Dad had never said that to me directly, but the implication hung in the air like incense. My own family saw my 20 years of service as an embarrassing hobby, my sacrifices as attention-seeking behavior. I stood there in my dress blues, surrounded by people who shared my blood but had never bothered to know my heart, and felt more alone than I ever had in the mountains of Afghanistan or the compounds of Iraq. "Come on, Sarah," Jessica continued, her audience now including most of the funeral attendees. "Surely you have something more appropriate? Something normal? This isn't a military ceremony. It's our father's funeral. Show some respect." The laughter was open now. Not cruel, exactly, but dismissive. The kind of laughter you hear when someone makes a social gaffe so obvious that everyone feels embarrassed for them. I was the gaffe. I was the embarrassment. My mother touched my arm gently. "Perhaps you have a suit in your car, dear? Something more suitable?" For a moment, just a moment, I considered it. I thought about the black dress hanging in my hotel room, still with tags. I thought about changing into something that would make them comfortable, something that would let me blend into their perfectly curated grief. But then I felt the weight of my ribbons against my chest. Each one told a story they'd never bothered to ask about. The Combat Action Medal for missions they'd never know existed. The Air Medal for flights that saved lives they'd never meet. The Bronze Star for leadership they'd never understand. I thought about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who died in my arms in a sandy hellhole halfway around the world. I thought about Captain Kim, whose family received a flag because I'd made the call that brought her home alive. I thought about every airman who'd saluted this uniform, every soldier who'd followed my orders, every life that had depended on the woman wearing these blues. "No," I said quietly. "This is who I am." Jessica's laughter reached its crescendo. "Oh, Sarah. Always so dramatic. Always making everything about you. Can't you just be normal for once? For Daddy?" The words echoed across the church steps, and I watched the faces around me. Some showed pity. Others showed secondhand embarrassment. A few showed the kind of cruel amusement people get from watching someone else's public humiliation. Not one showed respect. Not one showed understanding. Not one showed love for the woman I'd become. I was surrounded by my family, and I had never felt more invisible. But what none of them knew, what I couldn't tell them even if I'd wanted to, was that in exactly 37 minutes, everything would change. In 37 minutes, the most elite soldiers in America would prove that this uniform meant something, that I meant something. In 37 minutes, my sister's laughter would die in her throat, and she would finally understand who I really was. The funeral service passed in a blur of organ music and carefully rehearsed eulogies. Jessica spoke beautifully about our father's business success, his community involvement, his dedication to family. She painted a picture of a man I recognized but had never really known, the version of him that existed in country club dining rooms and charity auction programs. I didn't speak. No one asked me to. But as we filed out of the church toward the cemetery, I caught sight of something that made my pulse quicken. A black SUV with government plates sat discreetly at the end of the block. Then another, and another. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I recognized immediately. Package delivered. Standing by. The cemetery was only 2 blocks from the church, but the walk felt like miles. I was isolated in the procession, my uniform creating a bubble of disapproval that followed me like a shadow. Conversations stopped when I passed, resumed when I'd moved on. Jessica walked arm in arm with our mother, their heads bent together in what looked like consolation, but felt like conspiracy. Every few steps, Jessica would glance back at me with that smile. That knowing, superior smile that said I was still the weird little sister who didn't understand how the world worked. Millbrook Cemetery sprawled across a hillside overlooking the town. Its manicured lawns and ancient oaks, the final resting place for Connecticut old money. Dad's plot was in the family section, surrounded by ancestors whose marble monuments proclaimed their importance to anyone who cared to read. The graveside service was small and intimate, maybe 50 people arranged in a semicircle around the casket. I stood at the back, apart from the family group, listening to the minister's practiced words about dust and ashes and eternal rest. But my attention wasn't on the service. My attention was on the vehicles that had begun to appear on the access road below. Black SUVs and military transport trucks, arranged in perfect formation. Too far away for the mourners to notice, but close enough for me to count them. 12 vehicles. Approximately 100 personnel. My phone buzzed again. In position, awaiting your signal. The minister was reaching the conclusion of his remarks when I saw the first figure emerge from the lead vehicle. Even at this distance, I could make out the crisp lines of dress uniform, the measured precision of military bearing. Ashes to ashes, the minister intoned, and the mourners bowed their heads. But I kept my eyes on the hillside below, watching as figures began to move with the coordinated precision of a military operation. They emerged from their vehicles like pieces of a complex machine, each one finding their predetermined position with the efficiency of years of training. The service concluded with a prayer, and people began to approach my mother with condolences. Jessica held court near the casket, accepting embraces and murmured sympathies with the grace of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. That's when Mark noticed the vehicles. "What the hell is that?" he said, pointing toward the access road. Conversations paused as people turned to look. The black SUVs were unmistakable now, their official plates glinting in the afternoon sun. But it was the personnel that caught everyone's attention. They moved in formation up the hillside, their dress uniforms perfect, their bearing unmistakable. Soldiers, Marines, airmen, Navy personnel. Some of the most elite fighting forces in America, moving toward our small gathering with the kind of precision that stops conversations and straightens spines. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is that the military?" Jessica's face went pale. "Sarah, what did you do?" But I didn't answer. I was watching the lead figure as he crested the hill, and my throat tightened with emotion I hadn't expected. General Marcus Thompson, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, in full dress uniform with enough ribbons to outfit a small army. Behind him came faces I recognized. Colonel Martinez, my former commanding officer. Lieutenant Colonel Kim, whose life I'd saved in Syria. Major Rodriguez, Staff Sergeant Williams, Captain Zhang. Soldiers I'd led, officers I'd served with, warriors who'd bled beside me in places whose names were classified. They formed a perfect rectangle around the gravesite, their movements so synchronized it looked choreographed. But this wasn't a show. This was real. This was respect earned in blood and sacrifice and 20 years of service that my family had never bothered to understand. The mourners stood frozen, their cocktail party conversations dying abruptly as 100 of America's finest came to attention with a sound like thunder. General Thompson stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed by nations. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his words cutting through the cemetery silence like a blade. "We are here to honor Colonel Sarah Mitchell, one of the finest officers ever to serve our nation." "Colonel." The word hung in the air like a revelation. Jessica's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Mark actually took a step backward. "Colonel Mitchell," General Thompson continued, his eyes finding mine across the stunned crowd, "has served with distinction in 3 combat theaters. She has led classified missions that saved American lives. She has sacrificed more for this country than most people can imagine." He paused, letting his words sink in. When he spoke again, his voice carried 20 years of respect I'd never heard from my own family. "Colonel Mitchell, Would you please step forward? Every eye was on me as I moved through the crowd. Family members who'd been whispering about my inappropriate uniform now stared in silence. Jessica's face had gone from pale to gray, her expression shifting between shock and something that might have been panic. I stopped in front of General Thompson, coming to attention with the automatic precision of 2 decades in uniform. His salute was sharp, perfect, and when 100 soldiers snapped to attention behind him, the sound echoed across the cemetery like gunfire. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the hillside, "on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service. And on behalf of every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine you've led, thank you for bringing us home." The presentation of colors was perfect. The flag that covered my father's casket was lifted with ceremonial precision, folded with movements so exact they looked like a dance, and presented to my mother with the words, "On behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a token of appreciation for your husband's service to his country through the service of his daughter." My mother took the flag with trembling hands, her eyes wide with an emotion I'd never seen before. Not shame, not disappointment, something that might have been pride, but it was Jessica's face that I'll remember forever. The sister who'd laughed at my uniform 30 minutes earlier now stood frozen in place, her mouth slightly open, her eyes darting between me and the 100 soldiers who surrounded us like an honor guard. When General Thompson stepped to the microphone one final time, his words weren't for the mourners. They were for me. "Colonel Mitchell, your father would be proud, not just of the officer you've become, but of the woman you are. Leadership isn't about the uniform you wear. It's about the lives you've touched, the soldiers you've brought home, the country you've served." He paused, his eyes finding Jessica in the crowd. "Some people measure success by wealth or status. We measure it by the willingness to sacrifice everything for something greater than yourself. By that measure, Colonel Mitchell, you are the most successful person here." The ceremony concluded with a 3-volley salute that cracked across the Connecticut hillside like thunder. Each shot seemed to drive home the reality of who I was, what I'd become, what I'd sacrificed for 20 years while my family saw only an embarrassing phase. As the echoes faded, General Thompson approached me one final time. "Sarah," he said quietly, using my first name for the first time in years, "I know today was difficult. I know your family didn't understand, but we wanted them to know who you really are." I managed to find my voice. "Sir, how did you—" "Staff Sergeant Williams heard about your father's passing. The word spread quickly. When we learned about today's service, we knew we had to be here." He smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. "Nobody disrespects one of ours on our watch, especially not family." The soldiers began to file out as precisely as they'd arrived, but not before each one stopped to shake my hand or offer a quiet word of condolence. These were warriors who'd bled with me, fought beside me, trusted me with their lives. Their presence here wasn't just ceremony, it was family. As the last vehicle disappeared down the hillside, I turned back to find my biological family standing in stunned silence. The other mourners had begun to disperse, their conversations hushed and urgent as they processed what they'd just witnessed. My mother approached first, the folded flag clutched against her chest like a shield. "Sarah," she whispered, and for the first time in 20 years, my name didn't sound like a disappointment in her mouth. I didn't know." "You never asked," I said simply. Jessica stepped forward, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. The sister who'd laughed at my uniform now couldn't seem to meet my eyes. "Sarah, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I mean, I knew you were in the military, but I didn't understand." "You understood exactly what you wanted to understand," I replied. "You saw what was convenient for you to see." Mark cleared his throat, his earlier smirk replaced by obvious discomfort. "Jesus, Sarah. A colonel? Why didn't you ever say anything? Would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently if you'd known my rank? Or would you have found another reason to make me feel small?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, because we all knew the answers. My mother spoke first, her voice barely audible. "Your father, he talked about you. He kept newspaper clippings, articles about military operations. He never said anything, but he was proud. He just didn't know how to show it." The revelation hit me harder than I'd expected. 20 years of feeling like a disappointment, and he'd been keeping newspaper clippings. "He wanted to tell you," she continued, "but he was afraid he'd waited too long, afraid you'd think it was too little, too late. Maybe it was. Maybe 20 years of silence couldn't be undone by newspaper clippings and secret pride. But standing there in my dress blues, surrounded by the respect of my chosen family and the stunned recognition of my biological one, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but maybe understanding. Jessica took a tentative step closer. Sarah, I don't know what to say. I've been so horrible to you. So dismissive. I thought you were just… I don't know what I thought. You thought I was an embarrassment, I said quietly. You thought my service was a phase. You thought I was playing dress-up. She flinched at each accusation, but didn't deny any of them. But you know what, Jessica? I don't need your approval anymore. I haven't needed it for 20 years. Those soldiers who were just here, they know who I am. They know what I've sacrificed. They know what this uniform represents. I looked around at the faces of my family, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in my adult life. I came here to honor our father. I wore this uniform because it represents the best of who I am. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if that embarrasses you, that's something you'll have to live with. Not me. The drive back to my hotel that evening was quiet, but not empty. My phone had been buzzing with messages from soldiers who'd been at the ceremony, from former colleagues who'd heard about the day's events, from friends who wanted to make sure I was okay. But the most important message came from an unexpected source. My nephew, Kyle. Aunt Sarah, I saw the video someone posted of today. I had no idea. I'm sorry for what I said. Can we talk sometime? I'd like to hear about your service. The real stories, not what Mom tells us. I smiled, typing back. I'd like that too. Change doesn't happen overnight, and forgiveness doesn't erase 20 years of dismissal and shame. But sitting in my hotel room that night, still in my dress blues, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. I felt proud of who I'd become, not despite my family's disapproval, but in spite of it. The woman wearing this uniform had earned every ribbon, every rank, every salute. She'd led soldiers into battle and brought them home. She'd made decisions that saved lives and sacrificed pieces of herself for the greater good. She was worthy of respect. She was worthy of honor. She was worthy of love. And finally, she believed it. The next morning, as I prepared to return to my life and my duties, my phone rang. It was Jessica. Sarah, I wanted to call before you left. I know I can't take back 20 years of being awful, but I want you to know that yesterday changed everything for me. Seeing those soldiers, hearing that general speak about you, I realized I've never really known my own sister. Her voice broke slightly. I'd like to try. To know you, I mean. The real you. If you'll let me. I looked out my hotel window at the Connecticut landscape, at the town where I'd grown up feeling like an outsider in my own family. It would take time to rebuild bridges that had been burning for decades. It would take effort from both of us to move past the hurt and the misunderstanding. But for the first time in 20 years, I thought it might be possible. I'd like that too, Jessica, I said. But it starts with respect. Real respect. Not just because a general told you to respect me, but because I've earned it. You have, she whispered. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. As I hung up the phone and began to pack my uniform back in its garment bag, I thought about the woman who'd stood on those church steps yesterday morning. The woman who'd been laughed at, dismissed, made to feel ashamed of 20 years of honorable service. That woman had been looking for her family's approval. The woman packing this uniform today no longer needed it. She had something better. She had earned the respect of warriors. She had proven her worth in blood and sacrifice. She had served her country with honor and distinction. And finally, she knew her own value. The sound of my sister's laughter still echoes in my mind sometimes. But now it's joined by another sound. The thunder of 100 soldiers snapping to attention, the crack of a 3-volley salute, the voice of America's top general saying, "Thank you for your service," in front of the people who'd spent 20 years making me feel small. My name is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of the day my family discovered who I really was. The day their mockery turned to stunned silence. The day their shame became my vindication. The day I finally came home. Sharing this story with you, it reminded me why these moments matter so much. The moments when someone finally sees your worth, when the world realizes who you truly are. I know most of you listening right now won't hit that subscribe button. I get it. But here's the thing. If my story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own moment of being underestimated, that subscribe button is the only way I know you were here. It's the only way I know this mattered to you. It's free. It takes 1 second. And honestly, it's the only help I need from you. Because somewhere out there, someone else is being laughed at. Someone else is being dismissed. Someone else is waiting for their final revelation moment. And maybe, just maybe, the next story I share will be exactly what they need to hear. So if this story meant something to you, if you felt that moment when those 100 soldiers snapped to attention, please just hit subscribe. Let me know you were here. Let me know these stories matter. Thank you for listening to my final revelation.